Hello, and you're welcome back to this week's podcast. And this week's podcast is focusing on PDA. And I can't quite believe I'm saying this, but I have the one and only Laura Kerbey here on the podcast. And I'm a mega fan of her work. And if you've ever, I suppose, witnessed me, maybe witness is the right word, heard me or watched me deliver a training online or in person on PDA, you'll have definitely saw me either bring this book in person or showing it online. And more recently, I purchased her more recent book, The Parents and Professional Simple Guide to PDA. So, Laura, you're so welcome to the podcast. And would you like to tell, I suppose, our listeners, or if they're watching the video format of the podcast, or viewers, a little bit more about yourself and your journey with PDA?
Yes, thank you. Well, Amanda, thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be on the podcast. So my background is teaching. So I started teaching, it will actually be 25 years in September. And I went straight into working in the supported learning department of a really large mainstream college, but working with learners with a real range of needs. And I always just felt really drawn to and connected with the autistic students. Didn't realise back then that I'm neurodivergent as well, which is probably why I felt so comfortable working with them. I specialised in autism. After a few years, I became the Autism Champion for the college and then the Autism Champion for the Surrey College Network. And then I left the FE sector and I became an assistant head and then a head teacher in a specialist school for children aged 7 to 19 with an autism diagnosis. And it was while I was working in that school that I first heard the term pathological demand avoidance. And I actually wrote about this in my first book, the Educator's book, because what I realised working with that one young person in particular who clearly had an undiagnosed PDA profile was that everything I thought I knew about autism and all the strategies that I thought worked for autistic young people, children, literally had the opposite effect with this young person. I think a lot of people, when they hear about PDA, whether they're a parent or a professional, they talk about their light bulb moment. And I can remember my light bulb moment of Googling pathological demand avoidance. And it was like reading a description of this young person. I was like, oh my God, yeah, they do that, they do that, they do that. It was extraordinary. And then realizing that everything that I was doing and everything that I was trying to implement for this young person was actually making things a lot worse for them. Whilst I was working in that school, I realized, and again, this is something that I think parents can really relate to, I just didn't have anyone that I could refer parents to if they were struggling. There was nobody that I could say to a parent who was coming to me in tears, Laura, I don't know what to do, we're dealing with behavior in the house which is so challenging that my other children are having to sort of stay at my parents at the weekend, or whatever it was. And I just didn't have anyone that I could say, right, I know this person is going to be really helpful. So I thought, well, I need to become that person. So that's why I set PAST up, which is Positive Assessment, Support and Training. And at PAST now, we've been, how long have it been now? 13, 14 years. We do everything that it says we do. So we do assessment. So I work with an amazing clinical psychologist and we specialise in PDA assessments. Lots of support with families. So I do lots of online consults and then I do lots of training in schools and colleges. And then I also 8 years ago set up a tutoring company for children and young people who can't go to school. Because we know that so many young people with a PDA profile, the school system just isn't right for them. So we've got now, it's around 70 children, young people accessing their education through Kite, and almost all of them, not all, but the huge majority of them are autistic with a PDA or a demand avoidant profile.
That's even just blows my mind, the amount of families, PDA individuals that you've not only supported, I would say, nationally in your own country. You're based in the UK, isn't that right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I would imagine you'd have international people coming to you for support as well.
Yeah, no, I do. I do consults with families in America, Australia, Canada.
And your past training, I would have actually, so here in Ireland, I know many of our listeners would know, I would have developed for our autism charity As I Am, I would have developed their national training program on PDA. But I remember when I was doing my deep dive research long before I was putting it all together, I undertook some of your training over on the PAST, the PAST framework, and I just found it phenomenal. I suppose that's where I then went purchasing all your books and deep diving and learning. I suppose one of the questions that came in on the question box was in relation to your later in life identification. And one of the questions was, how do you support yourself now, knowing that you're a neurodivergent adult, say differently to maybe in the past, or maybe figuring yourself out now as a neurodivergent adult?
I think there's two ways. I think the first way is I'm so much kinder to myself now. Like in my book, I wrote a book about ADHD as a late diagnosed woman, and I put in the front the words that I used to describe myself with. So things like lazy, and I'm like actually the least lazy person probably I know because I don't stop. I thought I was lazy, disorganized, a walking disaster, forgetful, like just all of these things. And I very much looked at the things that I couldn't do as real negatives, like oversensitive, all of those things. And I think when I got my diagnosis, it made me realize that actually I'm not any of those things. I've got ADHD and yes, I can be really forgetful, and yes, I can be really disorganized, but there's also lots of things that I'm very, very good at. But I think I'm kinder to myself. I'm very impulsive, so I still struggle with that. But now I'm like, no, Laura, slow down. It's your brain. Like you don't need to do that thing immediately. I think the other thing as well, I think once you have that diagnosis, it's much easier to advocate for yourself with other people as well. So I can now say, I mean, I did it recently. I was invited out with a group of people that I don't know very well. And I was just really honest, and I just said, look, I'm really sorry, but I find big groups of people that I don't know well really quite, and people think I'm really confident and I'm really sociable, and I am. But walking into an environment where I don't know loads of people is really, really intimidating for me. It makes me feel so anxious. But because I was able to explain to this lady, look, I've got ADHD, I find this really difficult. She was lovely. She was like, no, I completely understand. And I actually did end up going on this night out with all these people because she made sure that she did things to sort of support me in that environment, which I just wouldn't have gone before. Or I would have gone, had far too much to drink to give me the confidence to go, and then made a complete fool of myself, and then gone home and agonized over every conversation I'd had. And yeah, so I think life just makes more sense to me now, in a nutshell, which is important.
That makes a lot of sense to me. This is not exactly related, but I was working I work kind of all over the country, but I'm based in the West, but I had to travel the east recently for work. I was unexpectedly then going to like a ball or of some description, and it was amazing. But I didn't plan to be there, and I found myself, I didn't even drink a lot, but I found myself, I got very tipsy very quick. But I think it was the anxiety and I hope I don't say the wrong thing, or I hope I'm gonna. So I feel I'm 45 now. I was identified at 39 as autistic, ADHD, and then later PDA. But I find that even now still, I definitely have the piece where you're saying, like, I now feel like I can advocate. But even when I land into the situations, then I'm like, oh gosh, this is a bit too much for me. Maybe I just can't find my way out the door again. Do you know what I mean? Or does that make sense to you at all?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I actually wrote about this about a year ago. I went down to speak at an event in Devon, and I was staying overnight, and I spoke at this big conference. It was a head teachers conference. And then they asked me to stay for dinner. And I was like, they asked me weeks in advance, would you like to stay for the dinner? Because it's in the hotel. And I was like, okay, chose my food, went down that evening, and there was just all these people. I didn't know anyone. Then I found out there was a quiz, and I was like,
I would
I
be
can't
gone.
handle, yeah, I can't do it. So I went and found an organizer, and I just said, look, I'm really sorry. I don't feel comfortable coming for the dinner. Um, but I need to eat. And they were like, no, that's absolutely fine. We understand. And they found me a really quiet library. I ended up sitting in this beautiful library on my own, eating my dinner. And I don't think I would have done that before my diagnosis. I would have thought the people pleasing would have kicked in so much. I'd have been, oh, I don't want to let the organisers down. And I would have had the worst night. I would have just sat there with all these people I didn't know. And I also thought, I'm exhausted from speaking at this conference. I'm going to be even more exhausted if I then have to continue the performance all night. So I was like, no, I'm not doing it. So I think it just gives you that permission to say no. But the other thing that I really want to just say actually really, really quickly is that you don't have to have a diagnosis to identify. Self-identification is so valid, and I really am a strong advocate for people to be able to say, I'm neurodivergent, I'm not going to do that, or that makes me feel uncomfortable, or I need you to do this in a certain way. And you do not need a formal diagnosis to be able to do that. That's really important.
Absolutely, because again, I often think of people like myself that could access a diagnosis, say a formal diagnosis. It's a privilege
Yeah,
to have, or even
yes, it
to,
is.
for some people, it's not even safe. Like for could be a family circumstance, community circumstance, whatever it is, to even be able to say I am different, because we can't know all the variables. But I do know from talking to other individuals that sometimes it's literally not safe for them to even publicly identify, let alone be seen to
No,
go for that assessment. So thanks for acknowledging that. It's really important for any of our listeners to know that as well. I suppose moving then, I suppose back to maybe my favorite, I suppose, passion interest at the moment are your books, but also the very specific topic of PDA. So say if I was a parent or a professional, I'm just thinking now over the course of the summer, they might be listening to the podcast and thinking of, September coming for back to school. So if I have a child that I believe is PDA, and maybe I know they're a PDA, and the teacher's like, okay, I have students coming in with the PDA profile. Is there anything that stands out to you, maybe even an understanding what PDA is, that you think it would be useful for them to know from listening to the podcast?
yeah. So at the moment, PDA is widely thought to be a profile or a type of autism. Now, there is a lot of debate around that. I think I saw a post just yesterday, actually, on Instagram, someone very boldly saying PDA is not part of autism. But at the moment, officially, from a diagnostic perspective, PDA is part of the autism profile. We do see some significant sort of differences between a more kind of typical presentation of autism and a PDA profile. But in the most sort of simplistic of terms, individuals who have a PDA profile have an extremely sensitive nervous system. And to them, the most important thing, we used to talk about PDA being an anxiety driven need for control. And actually, what's more important than control is autonomy. So, a nice way to rephrase PDA is a persistent or a pervasive drive or demand for autonomy. I much prefer that for various reasons. So, to somebody with a PDA profile, um, autonomy is what they need all the time. So that understanding that to be autonomous needs to be self-driven. Nothing is controlling you. You are totally in control of the direction that your learning is going in or your day is going in. Then being told or asked or expected to do something which shifts the direction at all or changes or lessens the autonomy will create a huge wave of anxiety, and then the individual will not be able to follow those instructions or follow that demand. The other thing that's really, really important to understand about PDA, though, this is what we really do try and identify during the assessment process, is it's not just other people's demands and expectations which cause that anxiety. It is very much often internal demands, and PDAs often can't do the things that they want to do as well as the things that they don't want to do. And in a very, very simplistic way of looking at it, and this is something that Eliza Fricker, my friend and colleague that I work with, talks about, it's can't, not won't. I can't do it because you want me to, or you expect me to, or because I want to. And again, just to use an analogy that I used in one of my books, that kind of analogy, that understanding that autonomous means self-driven. When I'm doing my training, I wrote about this in the book. I ask people to imagine that they're in a car, they're driving the car, and the passenger next to them keeps making comments about their driving, keeps making suggestions. Oh, you could speed up a bit if you wanted to. Oh, you could have gone then at the roundabout. That's initially going to make you feel really kind of like irritated and stop telling me what to do. If the person you're in the car with actually started leaning over and pulling the steering wheel, actually trying to change the direction that you're going in, that's going to make you as a driver feel really, really scared and unsafe. And the most likely thing that you're going to do in that situation is basically you could lash out to get the person away from you, you could tell them to F off. You're probably in that situation very likely to say to that person, get out of my car, I don't feel safe with you. And you'll want to carry on the drive that yourself. That's what it's like for someone with a PDA profile. When people are telling them what to do, trying to take that autonomy away from them, it's like having a driver in your car that is making you get out my car. So when we're working with PDAs, we need to see ourselves either as a parent or as a professional as being a helpful passenger. You are going to facilitate a really successful, pleasant journey for this individual. Um, and PDA is, they are very, very willing to, they want to learn. The PDAs that I work with often are thirsty to learn. They want to learn, but they need to be able to be given that autonomy to do it in the way that best suits them. So I talk in the educator's book about the fact that I no longer see myself as a teacher or a tutor. I'm a learning facilitator. So that's how you have to be. If you're working as a professional, you're facilitating learning or facilitating therapy. If you're a parent, then you're facilitating an interest-led nervous system, basically.
That's really interesting that I won't attempt to show you my drawing because it's atrocious. That's interesting that you said about the car analogy, because I draw a little character online called Otti. It's not particularly interesting or brilliant, but I was trying to explain I have 4 autistic children and 2 have a PDA profile. So my gorgeous Jack is PDA, and he had a tricky time last week, and I was trying to explain to him it wasn't his fault, and I drew the little character Autie because he recognizes a little picture of it in his room, and I was saying like Autie's driving the car, and it was like the other little character. I can't remember, did I draw them with brown hair? I can't remember, not particularly for any reason, but I was trying to make sure it didn't have his color hair, so he wasn't like, which person am I? It was just trying to explain. But what I also showed him was, obviously it wasn't even the person like pulling the wheel, it was like the other person just took the wheel, and then Autie's like, oh,
Yeah,
what the heck is going on? But on the
yeah,
outside then was the bystanders watching and being like, what's going on? Because they didn't get what was really happening inside the car, like the autonomous piece. So it actually helped him, I think, anyway. Again, I'll have to keep kind of working on it with him because he also has an intellectual disability. But I could see that it was making sense to him a little bit, that it's not his fault. And because somewhere along the way, and it wouldn't have been here in the home, but somewhere along the way, someone must have said to Jack, it's not language we use here. They must have said he was a bad guy. And when he has those tricky times, he goes, "I'm a bad guy, Mom. I'm a bad guy." And he'd
bless
bawl and
him.
crying, and I'd be like, "You're not a bad guy, Jack. It's really tricky for you."
No.
So for people, I suppose, like myself, that are very visual, that's what I loved about this particular book. I suppose it's your collaboration with Eliza to make visual what it is that you're trying to
Yeah.
transmit in knowledge. It's just so useful.
So I was just going to say, I think with all of our work we do together, we want something that is going to be really easy to read. Like, when you're a stressed professional or a stressed parent, you don't want to be reading like great big thick heavy textbooks. You just don't have the time or the spoons to be able to do that, the energy, the capacity. So we wanted something that was really visual, was really easy just to pick up. And there's loads of analogies in that, in all of it. I do love an analogy.
I suppose for any educators listening, so they might have a PDA student, because in Ireland you'd have kind of files to let you know the students that are coming in and maybe their profile or whatever. So maybe they're reading for the first time. Amanda's coming into our setting, maybe at second level. So that would be like, I think, high school in the UK.
Yeah.
And Amanda's a PDA profile. Is there anything that teachers could be obviously going and undertaking the past training, buying your books? Like, honestly, if anyone watching the video format of this podcast, you'll see I do like a good book. So I'm always recommending books. But I suppose if I'm a teacher, I've got the books, I'm thinking of doing the training. Is there anything practical? Say they haven't the time right now, but they're thinking, what should I be thinking about for the future? How can I support the student?
Yeah, so if we just go back to that analogy of the car, when we publish our books, we always get sent copies of them, and I got my copy just before it was published, and I was reading that analogy, and I was like, oh, I like this analogy, and then I really kicked myself because I realised that I'd left a really vital part of the analogy out, and that is that you would only give someone a lift in your car if you trusted them and felt really safe with them. So when I get the opportunity, I need to put that in the book. So the fundamental thing that you need to do if you are a teacher and you've got a young person with a PDA profile coming into your school or college, you have got to build up a really authentic, safe, trusting connection with them. You until you have that, I'm always asked, what are the main things that any neurodivergent child needs in any setting? And it's easy. It's at least one safe person and at least one safe space. Yeah, so that is absolutely fundamental. You have to have that safe connection. And it's got to be a really genuine connection as well. You can't force it. You cannot fake it. You cannot rush it. Um, the other thing that I think I always say about kind of like PDA approaches is that they don't cost any money. You don't need to spend a penny to work effectively with someone with a PDA profile. You don't need to laminate anything. You just need to make sure that that person feels that you are on their team. They need equal relationships as well. So one of the things I think is really important is show the individuals with PDA that you're working with that, yeah, I'm going to do this piece of work as well. I'm going to get involved in this project. This is, here's one I prepared earlier, because I think this is a really valuable thing to spend my time on. PDAs have absolutely got to see the value in anything that they are going to do. So making sure that you're enthusiastic about it as well, and that you show that you think it's valuable, I think is really important. And just by getting involved in a piece of work, and doing it with them or doing it alongside them, shows them, yeah, this is something that I want to spend my time doing as well.
That's the key word I was thinking about when you were talking about kind of even earlier about being the facilitator. It's kind of going alongside the person as opposed to
Yeah.
like directive, imperative kind of speaking towards the person. So I suppose if there was a teacher then, an educator here in Ireland or abroad, listen to the podcast and they're thinking, okay, I want to be that safe person for
Yeah.
whoever the student might be in the future. Is there any, say, misconceptions that they need to maybe self-reflect on and ignore going forward and now being like, that's not actually say, for example, that's not true, or that's a myth on PDA, we'll say, for example, or a myth on a student that has a PDA profile and maybe I don't understand PDA yet.
I think the biggest myth is that PDAs don't want to do stuff. That's simply not true. We see at Kite our learners with a PDA profile do the most amazing work, the most amazing things. But as I said, it's because they see the value in it. And I think that's with neurodiversity generally, actually. If I think about the subjects that I loved at school, they were the subjects that really mattered to me. They're the subjects that I loved and I saw value in, and I wanted, I was thirsty to learn more and more and more about these things. I still am now. I still love learning. I can remember sitting in a maths lesson, literally crying in frustration because I couldn't it wasn't just that I couldn't understand algebra and fractions, I couldn't understand the point, and it was like, when I'm older and I go shopping, the price will be on the clothing. It's not going to say like the price of this item is X to the value of Y minus 2. So what is the point of learning this? And I think that is essential for PDAs. They want to learn, but they have to see the value. And I'm just going to give you another little analogy or another little anecdote, which I think really reflects this. And that was years ago, pre-COVID. I was working with a family and they had a son in what we have year 11 here, so it's like the GCSE year, it's like the crunch year. And I think there's so much pressure put on kids in that year. You've got to get your GCSEs, you're not going to get a job when you're older unless you get maths and English. And this young person just wasn't able to go into school, and they were being told constantly, you've got to go into school, you've at least got to get your maths and English. It just didn't work. This young person became, like lots of the autistic kids I work with, became nocturnal, was sleeping all day, getting up in the night, you know, engaging in behavior with people his parents weren't very comfortable with him being with in the evenings. COVID hit, and he went. It was agreed with him that he wouldn't stay in the family home, and he was going to go and stay in a very rural location with his uncle on a farm. And he loved it. He loved working on this farm. He became good friends with one of the guys that ran the farm. And he was working on this farm and said to this guy, the farm manager, I love doing this. How do I get to do this as a job? And the guy said, well, you need to go to college and you'd need to get like a whatever level in agricultural, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, what do I need to do that? He said, you just need maths and English, mate. You just need all the equivalent. Got straight on the phone to his dad. Dad, I've got to get maths and English. And the dad was like, oh my God, like, we've been telling you this for years. Up until that point, he saw no value in getting maths and English. There was like, it was just like, what's the point? as soon as there was a point and a value to it, he was like, no, I want to get those exams. And he did. And he went off to agricultural college because it was about the value for him. So we've got to make, we've got to make lessons, we've got to make topics at school, in college, or even on an AOTIS package. You've got to make them interesting and exciting and, valuable to that young person. You also have to have an understanding, as I've mentioned earlier, that PDAs can't, not won't. There will be an internal battle going on sometimes. I want to do this thing, but I can't. And I think the other thing that, I mean, I used to do quite a lot of tutoring myself with our kite learners. One of the things that I learned was it's okay not to finish a project, because PDA learners, their interests can change really rapidly. They can have these very transient interests. So I would spend maybe 2 or 3 weeks working on a project with someone. We put hours and lots of time and energy into it. I could go for the fourth week. Oh, we could finish your play you're writing today, or that design for whatever it is. I don't want to do that anymore. And there's no point then saying, oh, come on, we've been doing it for the last 3 weeks, what ways you just have to go, no, that's fine. We'll move on. You've got to keep, again, thinking of that car journey, you just got to keep going with them on their journey. And the only time it's actually acceptable to lean over and grab the wheel, change the direction, is if that person is steering into something that's actually going to put them at risk or at harm.
When you were saying that about how, they just often PDA learners can just kind of switch topics or interests. Now, it could also be my ADHD, but I could, if I was to show, I have I had to buy a shed because of like a cottagey type shed for all the books that I have. This is just like a snapshot over my shoulder, and you watch the video format of this, they'll be like, okay, that's a lot. But I have a lot of unfinished projects where I'm like, I'm going to do this, and then I cannot compel myself to finish it, but I might come back to it and finish it later with new insight or new knowledge. But if, now my husband wouldn't, but if he was like, God, you need to finish these projects or whatever, I'd be like, I would never touch it ever again. It's like, it's almost been, this might sound like a strong word, but violated or something.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that finishing is a demand. And also, a lot of the PDAs that I work with, I would say the majority of them they're perfectionists. If they're going to do something, they want to do it really, really, really well. So if it's not done to the standard that they want it to be, that's really quite anxiety provoking for them. So having an understanding of that. But I always say to teachers, one of my sort of bullet points in my teacher training on PDA is, don't worry too much about finishing. Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think the worst thing you can do as a teacher, and I used to remember this happening in primary school, you haven't finished your work, so you need to stay in at break and finish it. I mean, that is honestly the worst, probably one of the worst things you can say to someone with PDA.
It's like
you've got to take it home and finish it. Yeah,
because they won't be able to meet that pressure, so therefore you've imprisoned them by your well-meaning, but
exactly. So our job as teachers, when we work with someone with a PDA profile, is to ensure that we can evidence progress and we can evidence learning, even if they haven't finished the project. And you should be able to do that. And yeah, just go with their flow. Just be able to sort of chop and change. And okay, we're going to forget about this for now. Sometimes with the projects that I didn't finish, my learners would go, actually, Laura, do you remember we started that thing? Can we finish it? Yeah, of course. We can come back to it, but you can't enforce finishing.
No, it's compliance, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose I was thinking about a lot about what you've been saying about your kite learners. So for any educators listening and listening to you talk about your kite learners, are there principles that you would follow always in terms of how do I support a PDA learner, say online or in person at my setting, in terms of what are your must-dos if you're thinking about supporting a PDA learner as an educator?
I think the 101 is having that trust, having that relationship. I think always sort of considering your language. Are you talking to this individual as an equal? Are you talking to them in a way that they understand that you're not talking down to them, because PDAs can be really easily patronized as well. It's about things like, we actually did a diagram of this in the parents and professionals book. There's a teacher saying, stop talking, and the kids thinking that you're talking. And it's like it's having that kind of understanding. There's a similar picture of a parent saying it's bedtime and the child saying, but you're not going to bed. And it's understanding that that is not the child being cheeky or rude or defiant or difficult. That is how they see the world. Yeah. They need you to understand that to them, these rules and sort of demands are meaningless unless there's a what I could talk about the what's in it for me factor.
There's a book, just a page in the book there where the person's saying, say bye. And then the PDA person's like, why?
Why? I think the best way to work with someone with a PDA profile is absolutely to have a child-led approach. And I don't think, I know that at Kite, we are really, really good at doing that. We're really, really good at sort of, again, using the car analogy, jumping in the car with them and facilitating that journey. I do understand that is really challenging to do in some school settings. I think I've seen it done really well in like on AOTAS or education other than school packages. I've seen it done really well in some primary settings, some secondary settings. I I know for a fact that the hardest place to implement that PDA approach is within a mainstream secondary school or high school. And I think that is where so many young people with PDA, that's where their education, really, the system lets them down then, because it's really hard to implement that PDA approach within a mainstream secondary. What I see quite a lot, whether it's through my assessment work or through Kite, is children and young people with this profile who actually manage primary school quite well. And then that transition into secondary school and high school is just an absolute disaster because they can't have the autonomy that they need. But then what I see is them transitioning back into more of a formal setting post 16, because actually then you can get your autonomy back. You can say, no, I don't want to do French or drama or blah 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 blah. I just want to focus on the things that I love, and I can do that when I go back into college. So I think a lot of PDAs will bypass that secondary high school part of their education because it is really hard to implement that.
And it is, and even for, I know anyone that's heard me speak about it before in the podcast, I dropped out of secondary school, so that would be like high school for a
Yeah,
number of years. And it was literally, I think because I was so studious, we had like the equivalent of the GCSE here in Ireland is called the junior cert. I was just so focused on, I'm doing the junior cert. I love the junior cert. I love learning. I was hyperlexic, love words, love reading, all the things. But then when we got into fourth year, it wasn't so much about, so even though it was directive in the sense of you're doing the exam, I was fairly good at school, we'll say. So I knew I would do as well as I wanted to do or whatever. But then you go into fourth year in Ireland in secondary school, it's all about you get more control, but they're still very much saying, now you're going to focus on this. And it's not about the academic. My safe space of books was gone. It was more about developing the person. And it was like, now we're going to climb a mountain. So you have to climb a mountain. And now we're going to do this thing in the community. So you have to do this thing in the community. So I only lasted about 3 weeks when I was
yeah,
about 16, and I dropped out of school completely. Then it took me 2 years. And just as you
yeah,
say, I went back. So it should have been fifth year next, but I couldn't go back. So it took me another while. I eventually went back. And when I went back this time, because at fifth year, sixth year, you're nearly 17, 18, they kind of treat you like a young adult. So you have
yeah.
more control. So that logic, that was in my own life, what you've just said. Like it really resonates with me, my own
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, I was talking about university the other day actually to somebody with a PDA profile, and I said to them, I think you will absolutely thrive at uni because you're going to be focusing on the subject that you love and you know so much about it and you're really passionate. But when you're at university, like obviously the timetable is very different to when you're in school, but there's no one there taking a register. It's up to you. It's up to you whether you go. It's up to you whether you hand your homework, your not homework, but your coursework in. And I think again, sort of a lot of the PDAs that I work with just feel so much more freedom when they're in that environment rather than, I mean, the whole thing about school as well, tuck your shirt in, do your tie up. It's like a sausage factory, isn't it? And I think that it just doesn't work for so many PDAs. I need to be honest, I've seen very few success stories when it comes to PDA and that phase of education,
Or
if I'm
you might
honest.
see, do you think, have you noticed the kind of transition initially into like what we'd call first year? So you've left primary for the first few months, and then it's like Like you'll often see like a downward spiral, do
Yeah,
you
there
think?
can be a bit of a honeymoon period.
Mm.
I've worked with a few children who've been sort of described as model students, and then they just won't go back after October half term or Christmas. Um, I just think there's so much about the secondary system though, which is it's just so difficult. I mean, you could have five teachers in one day, um,
And
and,
five different approaches, five different
five different
attitudes.
yeah, exactly,
Gosh, yeah,
and
okay.
unfortunately, our secondary systems are very much run on a sort of punishment and reward systems as well, and again,
Yeah,
those just don't work for PDAs.
horrific. I suppose
Mm.
then maybe as a final question, because I don't want to take up any more of your time, because I know you're incredibly busy. So for any parent that's listening, that just as you kind of suggested, has a child that right now feels like they can't access in-person education, in Ireland, could they access your kite learning online, or is that something that's because it would be different? I suppose it would be different
Yeah,
curriculum and things, but could
if
they?
yeah, so we don't really follow in a curriculum at Kite. We the curriculum is basically created with the young person. They learn about the things that they want to learn about. But yeah, I mean, we I don't know too much about the sort of
Irish
EHCP
system.
equivalent in Ireland, but yeah, but I mean, some of our young people just thrive with that online approach. You know, they don't have to turn the cameras on if they don't want to. Some of our young people just communicate purely through Discord. We've had one young person who actually ended up doing GCSEs and A levels with us, and his aim is to go to university. Who never actually directly really spoke to their tutor. The tutor would send the work by email. They would complete the work in their time, sometimes at like 3 in the morning, email it back to the tutor for feedback and marking. You know, it was just again very much led by what the student was able to do, and he did really, really well with that.
So final question then, if I'm a parent and say for a variety of reasons I can't access, say, kite learning or online learning, but maybe my child would like to eventually go back to school with it. So this is very much directed by the PDA student,
Yeah.
but the parent doesn't know what can they do to facilitate that, or even the school maybe, or like we know the student wants to come back. What are things, say, for three or four things that maybe they should consider doing?
I think one of the things to think about doing is something called ragging the timetable. So sitting down with the young person, looking at the timetable and looking at every element of the day, which would include lunchtime, break time, transitions, everything, and then asking the student what are the red parts of the day. So the parts that are just like I can't do that. I just cannot do that. Amber parts of the day would be it's a bit tricky, but I'll give it a go, no pressure if you can't do it. And then the green parts of the day are, I love doing that. So you could have, and this is quite common with PDA, you could have a PDAer who's, because PDAs are often incredibly socially driven, I just want to go in at lunchtime and see my friends and kick a football around. And allowing that is really, really important because they can build up their trust, they can build up their, you know, their sense of like, I am actually welcome in this space. I do feel very safe. So that's one thing that I think is essential. Also, as I say, making sure that the young person has always got access to that safe person and that safe space, and really thinking about how they can access that. Because a lot of the young people that I work with don't want to look different. They don't want to be holding up a timeout card or having a TA sat next to them. So having those kind of strategies in place, like if you need a break, you can just walk out. No one's going to question you. So thinking about that, I think flexibility around things like homework, you know, homework is non-compulsory, for example, in the primary system here. But are there ways that the timetable can be adapted so that the young person doesn't have to go to every single lesson, but they could maybe have some time in school, you know, with a safe person to sort of, have you got everything you need for your homework? Do you want to have a quick look at it now? Um, Also, I think another thing is which can be really helpful is a check-in and a check-out every day. So coming into school in the morning, being able to access that safe person. Is there anything that you're worried about today? Is there anything that I can help with? Same at the end of the day. How was your day? Just sort of bookending it. And also a soft start to the day. So recognizing, I talk about the anxiety bucket a lot in my book, recognizing that a lot of individuals, not just PDAs, a lot of neurodivergent children will be arriving at school in the morning with an incredibly full bucket. They therefore haven't got any capacity for any more demand. So having to go straight into a classroom, which is a very demanding environment, so many reasons is really difficult. So allowing them to come in either a bit later when the school is quieter, or coming in but not having to go straight into the learning environment, maybe going in a library if they like reading, going in the art room if they like drawing, listening to music, whatever it is, just allowing them to have that time to themselves, to allow that bucket to evaporate a little bit, and then they can join in with the learning when they're ready. And really just about giving them as much autonomy and respect and trust as you can give them.
Thank you so much for all of the time, incredible expertise, knowledge and insight. And what I'll be doing for anyone listening to the podcast or watching back the video format of the podcast, I'll have all of your links and information there if they'd like to learn more, especially about assessments. I think that'd be very interesting. I think it's all very interesting, but I think the assessments piece would be very comforting for a lot of parents as well, and also PDA individuals. They can get that clarity. I'll also pop in about your kite learning and past and any other information that you think our listeners would really find valuable. So a huge thanks for myself. And it's like a pinch me moment that the lady that has inspired so much of my own parenting and support to other people as well has taken a moment to talk to myself on the podcast. So huge thanks to you, and thanks to all of our listeners as well. So thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.